What's going on, fam? You're listening to episode 3 of the Martell Effect podcast with yours truly, Jordan Martell. This time, I'm only taking a couple month hiatus rather than a year, so incremental baby steps. But not to worry, I managed to find a solution to this. Now I got a little bit of stored ammo. I got a couple episodes waiting after this one is done, so hopefully gonna put an end to all these long delays in between episodes. Granted, there have been a lot of positive shifts, I suppose you would say, the last couple months. I've since managed to transition out of my slave wage warehouse job at a certain convenience store I'm not going to mention the name of, primarily because I think it's more or less a problem that all industries have as a whole rather than just specific companies. I think if you go to Amazon, Home Depot, Lowe's, Big Y, I don't really think it matters. I think the warehouse industry as a whole needs to pretty much just go on strike at this point because they don't remotely get paid enough to fucking live off of. They break their entire fucking body down. I'd say that was probably some of the hardest work I've had since pretty much Hell Week during football. And all my athletes and former athletes are truly going to understand how difficult that shit is. So all you Cheeto Finger Charlies that are saying, oh, Hell Week in football, so hard. Lift a weight before you try to come correct, please and thank you. Your body quite literally has no recovery time in between shifts. You're fucking hurting all the goddamn time. The only time you do have, you pretty much are sleeping the entire fucking time. And in a case like mine where you may or may not be getting your breaks every 8 hours. Like sometimes I was working 11, 12 hours, no breaks the entire shift. And if you are fortunate enough to get a break, they want that shit done in 30 minutes. So if it takes you 25 minutes to get to the fucking break room, then enjoy your piss, bro, because you're back to work pretty much on the spot. Which is kind of a grotesque way to take care of the employees that, you know, push the product, make sure the stuff that makes the company money is on the shelves. Because without them, the company wouldn't make a fucking dime, and that's in any industry that you can fucking name. And quite honestly, this is why motherfuckers deal drugs, because motherfuckers are making $15 an hour, busting their ass, hurting the next morning. And at the end of the day, out of all that product, so give or take, say I was putting up 500 boxes a fucking day, my paycheck is give or take 3 or 4 of those boxes. And that's just my workload. That's not including the 3 or 4 other guys that I have to stock the rest of the entire store pretty much. So if you really want to break the numbers down, between 4 guys, probably as a total got 3,000 boxes of caseloads of between about 12 and 6. And an average caseload probably gets valued at about $65 or so. So like I said, 3 or 4 boxes, you probably get about $240, which is about a paycheck for one of us. Unless you really work your ass off, 12-hour shifts, day by day, then you might be able to scrounge up $500 if you're lucky. But even still, between 5 guys, that's $2,500, which is really nothing. You pay $2,500 to these 5 guys, and they stock, give or take, $125,000 worth of product, which is a pretty sweet deal if you're the employer and don't have to touch anything. Now let's make a hypothetical scenario. Let's say those employees aren't around to stock the shelves and make sure the store's ready to go the next day. This could be any industry, quite honestly. Let's say those employees aren't around to make sure the store is pretty much completely stocked the next day. Would make it pretty hard for the store to make money, wouldn't it? Could you imagine your boss pulling your workload and theirs? Not likely. They barely even pull their own, at least in my case. So I think I speak for most labor force workers when I say, and it might not even be labor force, it might be healthcare, because healthcare is going through its share of hiring trouble. Which will only amplify my point when I say, you're worth a lot more than what you're getting paid right now. Granted, there's probably a bunch of you fucks that I'm talking to that are absolutely useless at this given point in time. And that's okay. That can be worked on. In which case, get yourself a set of skills, something that you enjoy, something that you're passionate about, and that something that you can work on despite your current circumstances, no matter what they may be. And just hone that shit, and no matter what it is, as long as you make sure you add value to it, it'll pretty much be received, and odds are you'll get what you want out of it. Odds are not instantly, because shit takes time to hone in and master. I believe it was Picasso that walked into a coffee shop, doodled on I believe it was a napkin. Someone offered to buy it off of him, and he gave an outrageous number. I think it was about $10,000. And the lady said, $10,000, that took you nothing more than 2 minutes to draw. And he said, wrong, ma'am. It took me 40 years to draw that in 5 minutes. Because people on the outside looking in never see the hard work, dedication, the self-loathing. Am I good enough? Should I just get a day job? Am I doing myself a disservice by pursuing this? To the people on the outside looking in, they just assume that you're blessed with this God-given ability that you can just snap your fingers and make that magic happen. But in fact, and Picasso goes on to say this, if that person was able to produce the work that Picasso did on that napkin, they would have done it themselves. That's why his work was in such high regard and considered so valuable. Because Picasso did his 10,000 hours required to ensure that he is one of the best painters that ever stepped foot on the planet. When you really break down on how hard it was to be an artist back in the day, like nowadays we got classes, we can go to college, we learn techniques. Back in those days, there was no techniques. You had to live amongst nature, see how raindrops fell off of leaves, study geographical landscapes, study how the light reflects off a rose. To be an artist back in the day was significantly harder than it is today. Nowadays, you just go on your phone, look at a reference, study where the light sources come in from the photo. That's why I don't think there's ever going to be another visual artist that gains the notoriety that a Michelangelo, a Leonardo da Vinci, a Picasso gets. Because they did it in a time period where it was almost like they were doing magic. Nowadays we know it's technique, practice, hard work. Granted, at the same time, you got to be realistic with the product that you're putting out. Is it really worth what? Is it really the value that you're placing it at? Or are you just placing it at the value that you want it to be now? I found that overpricing can be very detrimental, because if the product's inferior to the price that you're asking for, then it could be perceived as you not being passionate at what you do. You're really just looking at the dollar. You're not looking to, again, add value to that person that you're providing a service for, thus leading to you not getting a good review in the future, thus you not getting any new clients, resulting in you either failing at whatever you're doing, going bankrupt, the list goes on. So again, make sure you're not valuing the dollar over the person that you're providing the service to. In other words, don't be a selfish cunt. But because I like to get back to my point, for those of you that are those people that are underpaid and undervalued, I will be addressing you fucks at a later date. You guys now have your homework. Get some life skills. Anyway, back to the people that I was talking to before. My labor force people, the ones that are not making their money off tips. Or maybe you're even making shitty tips. You might have that bullshit rule where because you make money off of tips, you only get $4.50 an hour. And your tips still might be shit. In which case, probably leave your job. But at first, it wouldn't hurt to try to maybe get a little bit of an increase. Something that makes it more of a possibility to live off of, especially in this economy at this current point in time. Because that's kind of the thing, right? It's kind of hard to have enthusiasm for what you're doing when you can barely afford to put food on your table, never mind your rent, your electricity, your water, especially when you're carrying a heavy workload. even more so than some of your bosses. And we've talked about this. Oftentimes, almost all businesses have this position called supervisor, which is kind of a weird concept, right? You're literally getting paid to overlook and watch people do slave labor. Meanwhile, that motherfucker is literally getting paid more than the people that are actually doing all the grunt work, operating all the machinery, might actually know the occupation better than the supervisor, because they're the ones that are in the line of fire every day. Let's take Stephen A. Smith, for example. I think played a little junior college basketball, but other than that, pretty underqualified for his current position, especially with how much he gets paid. Really no professional athlete experience at all. That's why most pro athletes hate his ass, because he doesn't know what it takes to get to that level. So why is he speaking on the mentality of a certain player? Talking about this guy had a horrible performance. He needs to be benched. He's garbage. His performance was an absolute disgrace to the league. Meanwhile, on that player's worst possible fucking day, would still scrape Stephen A. Smith in a one-on-one pickup game. 5-on-5, it doesn't really fucking matter. Yet this fucking lunatic is still making $500,000 a year, give or take. More than some NBA players that are playing the fucking bench. And no disrespect to those guys, because it's hard as fuck to even get to that position. And with as difficult it is to get to that spot, there's no reason that some everyday stand like Stephen A. Smith should be getting paid more than the league minimum for an NBA player. That shit's kind of ridiculous. Meanwhile, there's zero talent in what he does. He outlandishly vocalizes his opinion, makes up words or uses them in the wrong context, and he's just obnoxiously loud about it. There's no skill in what he does. The only business he has is doing what I'm doing, put his shit up on YouTube for free, and if people want to listen to his outlandish horse shit, then kudos to you. I'm glad you enjoy it. But leave the ESPN analytics to the NBA players. In other words, the people that actually live it opposed to just watching it. And to the ones that are living it opposed to the ones that are merely just supervising, I personally think it's time to renegotiate your contracts. And what I mean by that is, let's put in context of your favorite sports team, right? Say your work environment is your favorite sports team, and you are a player on that sports team. Just for hypotheticals, let's say you're a fan of the Pittsburgh Steelers, right? Let's say you're Deontay Johnson, for example. You got all these stat lines, 100 plus receptions, almost 1,200 receiving yards, something around there. Yet you're still undervalued as one of the best receivers in the league. Better yet, Darnell Mooney, even better example for the Chicago Bears. Numbers really weren't that far off. Top 5 receivers in the league. This man gets a 79 in Madden. And why is that? Because his surrounding cast is shit. His linemen can't block for his quarterback in enough time for him to get a pass off. So now your performance suffers because now the people around you aren't carrying their weight. You know in your wholest of hearts that you're capable of doing better. Oh, and now you're in a predicament where you can't show off the full capability or potential. And thus, by not being able to show your full value, those around you assessing your capabilities, in this case it would be the GMs and the management and the owners, then they're going to value you at a lot less than what you're actually capable of. In which case, this being a sign of poor management, probably a good idea to get the fuck out. However, let's go back to the Steelers. Say you're a relatively decent team, made the playoffs barely by I don't even know how the fuck it happened. It was like a crazy ass scenario. Like, I'm pretty sure this past season the Steelers had like a less than 1% chance of a fucking playoff run. Somehow, by the skin of the teeth, get that shit done. Anyhow, again, say you're Deontay Johnson, you put up these phenomenal fucking numbers, almost carrying a team in an age where receivers are almost outdated. A lot of teams like to run the ball, even Steelers again, Najee Harris. You got fuck, who's the Tennessee Titans running back, spacing on him. Derrick Henry, I believe. Very heavy run-orientated teams nowadays. You, of course, got the Saquon Barkleys and Kareem Hunts that run the ball and catch the ball at the same time, which in this case, the more skills you have, the more value you have, which in terms increases your ability to negotiate because it makes you that much harder to get rid of. Because what employer wants to pay two separate people to do two separate jobs when you can simply pay one person to do two jobs at the same time? Especially if you do those two jobs really well. Almost makes you unfireable. So take my recent shifts and transitions. I recently just got rehired as a casino dealer at one of the Connecticut casinos, which again, going back to the necessity of having skills. If I didn't take the 3-month course to get approved by a gaming commission to be licensed at a casino, I wouldn't have the ability to extend past a minimum wage job, or a dead end job rather. So because I got that little piece of paper that says I was approved by this casino to be a dealer, I can go to just about any casino I want and be able to find a job. Sorta. So here's the catch to that. Typically casinos don't hire you unless you have more than one game. So in this case, I predominantly have blackjack. I do the poker room as well. Those are two separate departments though, unfortunately. So I'd have to do either one or the other. And because most casinos don't predominantly hire blackjack only dealers, I've essentially pretty much been backed into a corner to pick up craps. But again, going back to what I'm talking about, the more skills you have, the more value you have. So by me picking up this game, it makes me that much harder to get rid of. Because not only now do they have to replace a potential blackjack dealer, but now they got to find a craps dealer, which in case are in very short supply, at least in Connecticut right now. Because nowadays you got a casino every 45-minute radius in either which direction. So now if you want to get into supply and demand, there's a high demand for people that deal multiple games. The supply is pretty low because most people just stick with the game that they initially got in the first place, which most likely blackjack. So for that reason, the opportunities are more or less endless, at least as far as the gaming industry goes for me. I could move to Puerto Rico, work in the Foxwoods, that's in the El San Juan Hotel if I wanted to. I could fly over to Mackay overseas and deal over there if I really wanted to travel and see the world a little bit. Do I have the ambition or passion to do that? Not particularly. Dealing for me at this point is pretty much like golden shackles. It binds me down. It keeps me from what I love doing. But it pays enough for me to have a comfortable living, which is more than what most people have. So I'm very grateful for that. If you ever want to put in a perspective on how well you're actually doing in life, I think it's $130,000 a year. If you make more than that, you're in the top 1% of the world. And to go a step further, if you make $60 or more a day, you're in the top 15 percentile of earners in the world. So you're doing better than 85% of the entire planet. Granted, are some places a little more expensive to live in than others? Sure, but typically those places that are more expensive to live in have a lot more opportunities. Sure, Cambodia is probably $100 a month to live in, but you're probably going to be living in a hut somewhere. Which, if you're living in a hut, happy as can be, harvesting your farmland, whatever you got going on, then kudos to you. I got nothing against that. But if your ambition is to be the Cambodian Arnold Schwarzenegger, which country are you more than likely to prosper in? Do you see where I'm getting at? And if you do so happen to be fortunate enough to be in one of these countries that you don't really have to dig yourself out of the trenches, you can prosper through a little bit of hard work and dedication and discipline. Unlike most, say, Alex Pereira, who fights for the UFC, trains out in Danbury, Connecticut with Glover Teixeira. He started out in an Aborigine tribe in Brazil somewhere. Like, we're not talking Rio, we're not talking Sao Paulo, we're talking out in the middle of the Amazon rainforest where there are absolutely no Walmarts or CVS's. If by chance you get a case of the munchies and you want a bite to eat, you gotta pick up a spear and hope for the best. And God only knows what that child had to do to fetch some fucking toilet paper. In cases like those type of people tend to strive the moment they get any type of opportunity. Like, again, for Alex Pereira, all he had to do was get to civilization. And he was able to take that opportunity, and years later down the line, now he's looking at a world title shot in the UFC. Then you got people on the opposite side of the coin, like Brittany Griner, who, despite being in one of the most privileged countries out there, especially being an African-American homosexual female, which that shit right off the rip will get you killed in some countries. You go to Afghanistan, go ahead, try kissing another female. Matter of fact, go and try to even wear those athletic shorts out there. I promise that shit don't even slide. But instead, she was born in the U.S., blessed to be 6'8" as a female, essentially spoon-fed a basketball career because most of these bitches don't exceed 5'10" at the highest. So with relative ease, she becomes the Wilt Chamberlain of the WNBA. Makes $600,000 a year just on the contract alone, not including her $1 million Nike contract. And again, if you exceed $120,000 a year, you're basically in the 1%. That's more than plenty to live off of. So this bullshit notion that LeBron's spewing about how, if the U.S. paid her more, she wouldn't have to go play basketball in Russia and risk getting detained by the police. Which sure, might be true in most cases because WNBA players don't make that much. Except we're talking about the number one player in the WNBA, who again makes $500,000 a year. There's absolutely no reason in hell she should have had to go over to another country to play for another team in her off season. She was given an offer. She signed willingly a contract to play for a team that, and me personally, I'm a chronic piehead. I've expressed my ambition to fight professional MMA. I get an offer to fight overseas somewhere. One of the first things I'm checking is, if I get drug tested, what's the worst that's going to happen to me? You expect me to believe she signed the contract not at least a little bit curious being a weed head, if that shit even flies out there? Given how uptight and angry most Russians are, probably not big weed fans. I'm just going to say that out loud. So quite honestly, it comes down to two things. Either it was complete ignorance. For some reason, she was completely oblivious that the country she's been playing basketball in doesn't accept weed and that you can go to jail for 2 years for it. Or she's a product of a privileged country that, who my dad has trashed on more than one occasion. She's knelt during the national anthem saying how objectified she feels being a black African American and all the police brutality towards black people. Well, I can assure you one thing. Those police weren't arresting you for weed. Those police didn't put you in jail for 9.5 years for having a weed pen. Which brings me to my next point. Why should she get saved for disobeying laws in another country when in our own country we got 250,000 plus inmates that are on weed charges alone? So why should she get saved just because she's good at putting a fucking ball in the net? So you're telling me store clerk Steve should go to jail because he smoked a joint on his downtime after work and he didn't have a hoop dream? That's horseshit. But again, that's what happens when you're really good at your job, despite how pointless and self-serving it may be. And listen, I'm a huge sports fan. I watch just about anything. But let's keep it 1,000. Do we really need professional sports in our life? Is it a bare necessity? No, most of us can get by our lives just fine without it. In fact, no other country except the U.S. holds sports in such high regard as we do. what tends to be held in high regard in most places are people that enrich others, which are professors, doctors, scientists, people that are trying to positively impact the people around them. But us being Americans and us being capitalists, we have this twisted notion that your net worth equates to your worth as a whole as a person. You could be absolute scum of the earth, but if you're making that cheddar, you might be able to make it better. Whereas if you're Wendy working at Wendy's, God forbid you got 28.5 grams of weed in your glove box in most places. And that might be the only extent to which they even break the law. But the fact of the matter is, if that scumbag has a fat stack, he can use that shit as a Mr. Clean Magic eraser and whoosh, wipe that shit clean. Because at the end of the day, the justice system is just like any other business, private or public. It's all about the bottom dollar. So if the judge, jury, and executioner can make an extra $20K by ensuring certain pieces of evidence goes missing, certain eyewitness testimonies get thrown out, whereas Wendy, who's working minimum wage, might have a kid or two, might not be able to afford to pay the judge, jury, and executioner out of pocket. So what tends to happen? They're going to pay with their time rather than money out of their bank account. Because a lot of these state prisons, a lot of these private prisons get their funding based on how many inmates they have. So in return, by incarcerating these people, these private and state prisons are profiting off of putting reasonably innocent people in jail. And in return, by tarnishing their name, pretty much ensures that they're going to have repeat business, which makes it even more fucked up. So now they're pretty much confined to having to be street pharmacists because most places won't hire them. Now they're stuck in this constant cycle of being in and out of jail because they have to resort to desperate means to provide for their family. And thus the cycle continues. Unless, of course, you can renegotiate your contract. Because if you do the crime, you're going to do the time. That is, unless you can pay the fine. So let's say you are one of these motherfuckers, right? Let's say your supervisor is out of work, right? He gets injured. It's like Dak Prescott. Ow, I hurt my hand. I hurt my wrist. I can't come into work. Granted, that did look like a bad injury, so I'm kind of making light of it. But in most cases, it's not as severe as this one. But let's put yourself in the shoes of Cooper Rush, right? Now you're forced to take on all this additional responsibility that you didn't have before. And say for those couple weeks, you do phenomenal. Your productivity is exceeding that of the guy that's on work leave. Things are running just as good, if not smoother. Now your employers are forced to make a decision. Do you keep shit running how it's running now and keep the productivity moving? Or you go back the way things were with the old guy where it was kind of running smooth, kind of not. Things could have been improved upon when that guy was kind of handling things. So now you become the one with the leverage. Because if you can go to your employers clear cut with the results, with the numbers, and be like, look, since I've been in charge, since I've been running shit, productivity has been up 3%. Sales have been up another 12% because we're getting more stuff done. We're getting more stuff on the shelves. Whereas 3 months prior to this, when this guy was in charge, we were only pulling this number, and that number. Because again, companies only care about the bottom dollar, what they're going to save, what they're going to get in return. So if you can prove to company heads that you're making less having this guy in charge rather than having me in charge, now you've grasped that employer's attention for more than one reason. One, you're proving to them that you have a deep understanding on how shit runs and operates, which will then give the owners and upper management more confidence in giving you the position rather than the other guy. And two, you're showing that you're tenacious and that you fucking want the position. Because if they're looking and see one guy fighting for it really heavy, and then you got the one guy that's in the position currently that's maybe a little complacent, maybe a little bit lazy because no one's threatened the top position for a long time. Now it kind of puts the other guy in the hot seat to have to outperform you. So now he's got two choices. Either he outperforms you, which in most cases you probably don't have to worry about. Because like I said, they've been complacent for a long time. They probably don't have that fifth gear built in. Or they fall on their face trying to keep the same pace. And then that's where you got the employer backed into a corner. Because here you are putting up better numbers than the guy above you. You're not calling out sick. You're not showing up late. Or whenever the fuck you feel like it. You're doing all the right things while the other guy's slacking off. But the pay difference just doesn't seem to add up. That's when pro athletes in their negotiations tend to get the owners and the GMs by the nutsack. That's when one guy vastly underperforms and doesn't meet the same pay standards as the guys below him. So let's go way back for a second. So back in the day, and I even remember, and I think this is quite honestly the one that started the hyperinflation in the NBA as far as pay scale for the players, is when Timothy Mozgov had that phenomenal season for, I believe it was Cleveland or LA, one of the two. And this is one of the one times I'll back LeBron. He made that motherfucker loaded. Because he was having modest success. Was a reasonably skilled big guy. But now all of a sudden, LeBron's going to him for all these alley-oops. He's getting like 14 points a game with like 8 rebounds. Which is one good thing I'll say about LeBron is that he makes everybody around him at least have the impression that they're better than they are. So because LeBron's a virtuoso in this regard, he managed to make Timothy Mozgov look like Shaq for a season or two. Timothy makes off with probably one of the best bank heists in NBA history. Next to Joakim Noah, probably. Signs an insane deal, I think, with the Brooklyn Nets for like $50 million and then flops completely. Now all these guys that are still putting up phenomenal numbers are looking at this shit like, well, why the fuck is this dude getting paid $50 million? I want at least $70 million for what I'm doing. I'm showing up every day. I'm hustling on both ends. Why the fuck am I getting paid $25 million? Meanwhile, this bum's fucking showing up half the days of the week. Doesn't even go to practice. Performs well only when he wants to. And that's when you name your price to your employer. Say, I want this much for this amount of responsibility. Because if this person's getting this much to only do this, that, and the third, and I got all these additional responsibilities that they don't have, why should he be getting paid more than me? And I think Foxwoods, where I deal at, kind of does it the right way. And I'm not sure if Mohegan does. But the dealers make more than the assistant supervisor floors. And I think that's correct because the dealers are the ones dealing the entire time. They're interacting with everybody. They're the ones drawing the money in. Whereas the supervisors literally just watching to make sure the dealer doesn't cheat and to make sure people's players' cards are getting rated. Aside from that, they're bullshitting, flirting with people's wives, whatever the fucking deal may be. Not all of them get down like that, but I'm just kind of using that as a hypothetical. But I think most places should operate that way. If you're going to have less responsibility, you should get less pay. A supervisor should only get a worker in its pay plus a little bit more is if he's supervising plus he's in the trenches with the other employees. Aside from that, you're getting paid to watch. Be grateful that's all you got to do and take your paycheck. with that little bit of strenuous activity, you should have enough energy in your system to have a side hustle to make for that little bit of difference that you're missing out on. So like I said before, state your price. And the employers are going to do one of two things. They're either going to tell you to kick rocks or they're going to oblige. Now, if you're persuasive and you can manage to convince them that you're worth the extra money and they do so, awesome. I'm happy it happened for you. But in the case that they don't oblige, you got to be willing to take your talents elsewhere. And that's the most important thing. You don't do this breakdown, you don't do this negotiation without being willing to walk out the fucking door. Because the average person has, give or take, 4,000 work weeks in his entire lifetime. And life's too short to make measly, barely scraping by wages. So you gotta go chase your worth. If you believe you're worth more than what you're getting paid right now, go after that shit. Show that you want it. Show that you deserve it. And lastly, I'm going to leave it on this note. If you do happen to get that pay increase and you get a promotion, don't turn into the guy that you loathed before you had that position. Don't get complacent. Don't get lazy because, now I can slack off because I put in my dues. No. You've been in those miserable, shitty work conditions. You know what it's like. You know they suck. Don't cast that shit onto somebody else. Alleviate the workload on them. Make them less stressed out. Treat them good. Make them feel like you care about them. And they'll be damn near willing to go to war for you. But cycles only change if you are willing to implement the change. On that note, I think this is a good spot for this episode to come to a close. Hopefully these words are something somebody needed to hear somewhere. Odds are I just made a bunch of people homeless and hungry, but like I always say, you never know what's good and what's bad. And say your employer does tell you to go kick fucking rocks and go somewhere else, then chances are it was meant to be, and you'll find a place that's gonna treat you the right way, that you enjoy, that you don't fucking loathe going into every single day. It's a matter of keeping the faith, because no matter how stressed we are, 9 times out of 10, we always end up fine a couple months down the line anyway. We always find a way to survive. It's in our DNA. So if shit looks bleak now and you don't feel like you're going to get the fuck out of it, it's a matter of delayed, not denied. You might not have it right now, but trust me, we're going to get there together. And on that note, to all my non-MMA fans, this is the point in the conversation where we part ways. So until next time, thank you all for listening. Health, wellness, peace. As for my MMA gambling junkies, it's time for the potentially perfect picks of the week. Here's what we got for UFC 210. Corey Sandhagen versus Yadong Sung. Getting off the card, you got Maria Agapova versus Jillian Robertson. Chances are this is more or less going to be a pink slip match. Both girls kind of up and down the last couple fights. Jillian Robertson's 1 for 3 out of her last 4. And Maria Agapova, I think, has been out win one, lose one, win one, lose one ever since she got to the UFC. First one was Hannah Cyphers. Got TKO'd after that. Won another one against Sabrina Mazo. And then just recently losing to the Ukrainian Marina Morris at the height of all the shit that's going on right now. So had a little bit of extra motivation going into that fight. The things that have gotten Jillian Robertson in trouble the last couple years, I would say, is the fact that her striking hasn't improved since she's got there. Or at least in the sense of power. So she doesn't have enough power to back her opponents off of her, gain their respect, so they tend to come forward. So unless their grappling defense is complete and utter trash, and a lot of these females that are coming out in this modern era MMA tend to be fairly well-rounded. They don't have too many holes in their game at all. And I'm saying this like Jillian Robertson's old. She's not. I think she's only like 26, but she's been around for a very long time. And she's been around since women's MMA has been in its developmental stages. So she's essentially a pioneer in the sport for women. So much like Royce Gracie was dominating way back when submission defense wasn't even a thing, he was throwing up shit that people had no clue what the fuck it was. You can kind of contribute that being the reason for Jillian Robertson's early success in MMA, because it was in a stage where a lot of females weren't really pursuing it. They were kind of just getting their feet wet. So everyone was kind of on even playing fields for the most part. Whereas now you got the Amanda Nunes's, the Juliana Peñas that can pretty much do everything. And Agapova kind of falls in that category. She's got 3 TKOs and she's got 5 submissions, so predominantly a submission artist. However, in her most recent loss, she got pretty much outclassed on the ground. So that kind of puts it in a little bit of a tough assessment. Because if Marina Moroz is able to outclass Agapova on the ground, Jillian Robertson 100% able to. Again, it just comes to if she's able to get her on the ground and if she's able to gain her respect. Problem is with Agapova's background of being Kazakhstanis tend to be fairly good boxers. So expect to see Jillian Robertson probably come out a little bit bloody in this one, but no different to the Priscilla Cachoeira fight where she got her ass kicked and then managed to pull off a submission at the end of the first round, might I add. I think a similar scenario is very likely because Priscilla is probably one of the most dangerous strikers in that division. Agapova can hit, isn't the best striker in the division, and Jillian's a very tough female, so look to see Jillian get her ass beat for probably like 3 or 4 minutes, and then she's going to pull off a rear naked choke, maybe in the first or second round. Secondly, we got Nicholas Mota taking on Cameron Van Camp. So Cameron Van Camp's an interesting prospect in this fight. Because, yes, he got TKO'd in a short notice fight against Andre Filho, however you pronounce that. I'm Portuguese too, isn't that terrible? But takes the short notice fight. Fares pretty decent against a guy that won the PFL title. Actually had him hurt at one point in the fight, then ends up getting knocked out. Keep in mind this fight's at 170 against a guy that without a doubt could be ranked in the next year or so. So I think people got to give Cameron Van Camp a little bit more credit in his last showing. Whereas Nicholas Mota, so what I've grasped from his fights and just watching him, if he can't play the bully, he shuts down and clams up. That tends to be the pattern that's been throughout his fight. So Jim Miller, couldn't bully Jim Miller, wound up getting his ass beat. Prior to that, won a couple on the regional scene where he could play the bully. I would have to go back and rewatch his Contender Series fight just to double check, but I'm pretty sure even though that was a unanimous decision victory in his favor, I think it was a 1-1 going into the third, if I'm not mistaken. I would have to, again, look back at it. But Mota, also not a very big 155er. He's only about 5'8". So a lot of how this is probably going to pan out is going to be based on how Van Camp's weight cut is. Because if he can cut the extra 15 pounds in a healthy manner, look to see him have a huge strength advantage. So call me crazy, call me a mad scientist, but I like Van Camp's odds in this one. I believe he's an underdog too. Look to see this to be an absolute fucking fire show. But again, I think that size differential is going to be a little too much. And I think you're going to see Mota wilt in the first 2.5 minutes. And Van Camp's going to capitalize. Because Van Camp, at the end of the day, he's a dog. Thirdly, and I've been kind of going back and forth on this one. So you got Javad Basharat taking on Tony Gravely. Now, I must warn you, I have a fairly hate-based relationship with Tony Gravely. Because no matter if I bet for or against him, my call is usually wrong. I'm sure a lot of people in the betting world can sympathize that one team or guy that never seems to pan out in your favor. Well, for me, that's Tony Gravely. So take this one with a grain of salt. And partly due to the fact that I haven't seen Basharat do a whole lot. I haven't actually seen a whole lot of his fights. I do know his brother just fought this past Tuesday on the Contender Series, and if he's anything like his brother, both are very talented. He seems to have a little bit more power in his hands. He's got more TKOs. He did just win a unanimous decision against a very tough Trevin Jones, who's very much a dog in his own right. And Tony Gravely's been on a fairly decent run. He's, I want to say, 5 for 2 in his last 7. Only losing to Brett Johns and Nathan Manis, who they're contenders. I don't think they're, if they break the top 15, they'll be 13th and 14th. But eventually I think they do phase out. Both of his last 2 wins have been against guys that are in their UFC debut. So you kind of got to take octagon jitters into account there maybe. Because prior to that, Tony Gravely had already had maybe 3 or 4 UFC fights. And he looked good in all of them. But in the case of Basharat's not a newcomer anymore. He's got a fight under his belt in the UFC. And those tend to be the guys that Gravely fares the worst against. Again, Manus, Brett Johns, guys that have been vets in the UFC for more than one fight. Both guys, without doubt, have the capability to put you out. But at this point, you got to kind of see where guys are at in their career. Have they been knocked out prior? Do they kind of have that chin shred issue going on where they're getting knocked out faster and faster each time? Now, in the case of Basharat, he's undefeated, hasn't really been hurt before. Whereas Tony Gravely, Nathan Manis TKO'd him. He's been hurt in fights prior. So it's really going to come down to rock'em sock'em robots, whose chin cracks before the others. So I would have to say, I think Basharat's going to pull it away in the late 2nd or 3rd round. It'll probably be a TKO. It'll be a tough fight, maybe fight of the night. But look to see Basharat keep that goose egg in his L column. Almost said 1 column. Next up, we got newcomer Daniel Zellber taking on Trey Ogden. Typically, I'm hesitant betting in the favor of guys that are making their octagon debut because, of course, you hear one could say it's a myth, and one could say it's just sports psychology. But a lot of people crack in their debut, and it's because the lights get to them. They're used to maybe fighting in a high school basketball gym somewhere. Now they're in a 10,000 seat arena, so people tend to get stage fright. It's a show at the end of the day. However, in the case of Zellber, he's got this it factor, this supreme confidence that he knows he's destined to be there almost. So you look for that type of mentality in guys coming up out of the regional scene or what have you, depending on how close you follow it. You can almost tell when a guy has this it factor quality about him that he's going to be around for a long time. When we brought up earlier about this new era of MMA fighters, the modern era, let's just say, and how scaled these guys are all around. Like, almost no weaknesses in their games. You got guys like Claudio Puelles. That's the guy that you need to fucking watch out for. That Peruvian fucking the lightweight division. The one that knee-barred Clay Guida. If that motherfucker and Zellber fucking end up fighting, that shit's going to be a barn burner. And to be completely honest, I see that happening, if not in the next 2-3 years, 100% when they're both ranked. So if you couldn't already tell, I'm kind of already dismissing Trey Ogden. He's under tutelage of James Krause, who's a very well-rounded martial artist, great coach. But with that split decision win against Jordon Levitt last time, that shows that because Jordon Levitt's not going to hurt you with punches, chances are he's not going to send you to the ER. He's going to out-grapple you for 15 minutes, maybe submit you. And the problem being with that is Trey Ogden's primarily a submission artist. Jordon Levitt's a submission artist. That went to a split decision. And now it's come to the point where I'm kind of trashing Jordon Levitt, but his striking isn't good. For the UFC's caliber, not good. So if Trey Ogden's not willing to, and again, I guess you contribute this to it being his first time in the octagon, so maybe he got yours his first time. But if he's not willing to get in the line of fire with Jordon Levitt, then he's not going to want to get in the line of fire with this guy, 100%. And just for the cherry on top, Ogden has shown no TKO ability in his career so far. Meanwhile, Daniel's got the corazon of a Mexican. So he's going to come out slinging fucking leather. Probably going to fluster Ogden. Maybe even clip him. And when he does, and I say when because I'm pretty confident that it's going to happen, he's going to put him away. So look to see Zellweger get this shit done probably in the first round. I say give Ogden 3 minutes and 50 seconds. Following that, you got power hitter from Brazil, Denise Gomes, taking on Thai fighter Lumalu Bunmi. This being Gomes' debut since fighting on the Contender Series, I think about a month ago, so fairly fresh start and fairly quick turnaround at that. From what I recall watching her fight, and that's the only fight I watched, was her Contender Series fight, I recall not being overly impressed with her performance. I think she did good. I didn't think it was contract worthy, if I recall correctly. Like we just got done talking about, some guys like Patty Plimlett just walk in there, they demand the stage, and they go on to win their debut and then some. I don't think Denise Gomes particularly falls under that category. Not to say she can't have a phenomenal career, but based on her Contender Series performance alone, I would say that she's definitely somebody that nerves do get to her. So if the nerves are going to get to her in her job interview, do you think the big show is going to be any different? Probably not. And Luma's been there plenty of times. She's been there with Angela Hill, Lupita Godinez, neither of which have been able to finish her. And those are two of her losses. Other than that, she's pretty much beat the living hell out of everybody else. Now, does Luma have that KO power that Denise has? Not at all. Matter of fact, I see this more or less probably going to a decision, because I think Luma's seen more sophisticated striking than what Denise Gomes has to offer, and it sounds like I'm trashing her, but fact of the matter is, most Thai fighters have been fighting since age 9. Luma's probably got 100 kickboxing Muay Thai fights. And Denise hasn't really shown a whole lot as far as submission capability on the ground. And listen, Thais get a lot of shit for not being able to particularly be great at grappling. Submission grappling at that. But they are very good at body manipulation. A lot more or less in the clinch. So the stereotype that Thai people can't particularly grapple, I find not to be the case. Not only that, they tend to have pretty solid takedown defense. And in Luma's case, the only person that really was able to take her down was Lupita, and her sisters are both wrestled for Team USA, I think, at least in the World Championships, maybe the Olympics. So not a whole lot of shame in getting taken down in that regard. Aside from that, no one's really been able to take Luma down, so look to see Luma box Denise's face off for the full 15. Moving into the main prelim, we kick that off with Trevin Giles taking on Louis Cosi. Another fairly solid underdog in this one, I'm pretty sure, because Louis Cosi's a more or less smaller middleweight, but I believe he is the Cosi with the better cardio. And for those of you who don't know, his twin brother also fights in the UFC. So if you think you've seen him before, it may or may not be him. Matter of fact, let me double check this just so I'm not steering you guys in the wrong direction. Alright, so correction, he is not the Cosi with the better cardio. So he's predominantly got one time where he's seen the third round, and then the rest are all first round finishes. So if I do recall, he kind of fell victim to the usual trap that power hitters fall into. Guys that get the first round finish all the time don't really work on their cardio because they think that's going to pretty much be their meal ticket all the way to the top. Once you get to the show, not always the case. So one hopes that he's worked on that and realizes that now after losing to Sasha Platnikov. And usually with this type of fighter, it's either two things. Either they're fast twitch and it's something they really can't control, kind of like a Conor McGregor. He's so explosive that his muscles use a lot of oxygen, so therefore he gasses out in less rounds than, say, a Nate Diaz. or it's simply just a cardio thing where they have the capability of having solid cardio. Where in Louis Kosey's case, he's kind of built like a Tim Sylvia or like Tyson Fury. Not to be disrespectful, but neither Kosey's particularly a really big muscle-bound guy. They're strong, but they're not particularly twitchy and explosive, if you catch my drift. So I think Kosey has the capability of carrying that power for all 3 rounds. It's just a matter of how much he's worked on it. He proved in his debut that he can run on fumes for 2 or 3 rounds. So if he can just manage his cardio a little bit better, maybe not get overzealous trying to go for a finish, learn to keep the poise, because Trevin Giles has shown, especially in recent fights, that his chin's kind of not really there. Because let's be honest with ourselves, it's going to be a kickboxing match with small gloves. And it's pretty much going to be whose chin cracks first. And with Trevin Giles having 4 KO losses, Louis Kosey's not particularly a good matchup for him in this regard. So look to see Kosey get it done in less than 2.5 rounds. Next up, you got Aspen Ladd taking on Sarah McMahon. So with Aspen Ladd, we've seen her on a little bit of a decline. She's had a lot of weight cut issues. She's had a lot of not having the right people around her as far as coaching people. I believe she's one of the people that date her coaches. Not particularly a good idea if you talk to most fighters. Or in most cases anyway, you never really want to mix personal and professional, which you can kind of see with Aspen Ladd. So it'd be interesting to see if her surrounding cast has stayed the same, if she's got a handle on her trainers, everything around her is quiet, she's been able to focus on camp. Because a clean-minded Aspen Ladd in this fight should take it no problem. Because she has the capability, I believe, to knock Sarah McMahon out. She's shown that in a lot of her fights fire when she first got to the UFC. And Sarah McMahon, even though she looked like she found the fountain of youth in her last fight against Carol Rosa, out-grappled her. I think Aspen Ladd's a way more dangerous fighter than Carol. That's again when she has a clear psyche. Under the impression that that is the case, I would say Aspen Ladd has the wrestling and the striking to negate whatever Sarah McMahon has to offer. I don't think her striking is anything to write home about. Whereas Aspen Ladd, again, has that TKO power. And don't get me wrong, Sarah McMahon, no slouch. She's probably going to make it to the 3rd round. It'll be competitive. I'll probably get 1-1. But see Aspen Ladd, if the cardio holds up and the weight cut's good, to get the TKO victory. So over 2.5 on that one. Next up at a Henzo Philly, you got Pat Sabatini taking on Damian Jackson. So I consider this to more or less be a pick'em. So if you can get either guy at a decent discount in the betting pool, so say if you can get either guy at like above plus 165, I advise you to do either which way, just because I think this is going to be a very close affair. Both guys predominantly submission artists, like I said. Pat Sabatini, Henzo Gracie guy. Damian Jackson has most of his wins by submission. So he's got 15 of his 21 wins by submission. Has only been submitted 1 time, and it was by technical submission 8 years ago against Yancy Medeiros, bulldog choke. So technical submission tends to mean he got slept. So tells me Damian Jackson, not someone that's going to go quietly. And then I'm pretty sure Pat Sabatini, never been submitted either. So what always happens when you get 2 submission guys banging it out? Ends up being a kickboxing match. So it's going to come down to who's got the better striking, who catches who first. I do know that Damian Jackson doesn't have the better chin because he's been recently KO'd by Eli Topuria. Pat Sabatini's only TKO loss was due to arm injury, so can't really count that in as a head trauma related thing. So I guess for that reason alone, Pat Sabatini probably ends up taking it. So look to either see Pat Sabatini probably get a second or third round KO, or go to a decision probably. Because Damon Jackson, good striker, but I don't think he has the power to put Pat Sabatini away or outclass him for 15 minutes. So Pat Sabatini over 2.5. As for the featured prelim, you got Anthony Fluffy Hernandez taking on Mark Andre Bellio. And for as much as I don't like Fluffy Hernandez for beating my man Adolfo Vieira, I met Adolfo back when I first started, maybe like 3 or 4 years ago. I think it was my first year doing MMA. He did a seminar at my gym. Without question, the nicest person I think I've ever met in my life. I don't even think there's a close second. I think I've even said it before, almost too nice to be a fighter. Which I think more or less has been his issue in the UFC, is that he doesn't like to hurt people. Whereas Fluffy's a disrespectful fuckwit. I understand he probably came from a broken childhood, whatever the issue may have been. Probably didn't have a whole lot of structure. That's why people do MMA. Because next to the military is the best way to obtain structure and discipline. But at the end of the day, I gotta give credit when credit's due. Fluffy's a damn good fucking fighter. If he's able to tap Adolfo, grappling's on point. And for the most part, his only real L was against Kevin Holland. Other than that, he's shown great fundamentals everywhere. He can knock you out. He could submit you, obviously. And in a self-preservation situation like a fight, it helps to come from a broken background. Whereas Andre Barrio came from Canada, probably a nice little urban spot, maybe lived in the woods in a hut somewhere. Doesn't particularly rub me as somebody that was underprivileged in any way. Probably likes the competition aspect of MMA. So you have that extra hunger that Fluffy Hernandez has. That could be the difference maker in him winning a decision or not. And Fluffy's a very quick starter. He comes out the gate swinging, hot, ready to fucking finish you. And Barrio's shown, at least in the last fight against Chidin Njokuani, that he doesn't like a firefight. If you're willing to press him right out the gate, then you can overwhelm him and catch him on the chin. Now that chin's been cracked. Up to that point, he had never been finished. And it'd be interesting to see how that affects him, because this is his first fight, I think, coming off of it, if I'm not mistaken. So psychologically, how is that going to damage Mark Barrio? And Fluffy's got a lot of momentum going in this fight. I'm pretty sure he's on like a 2-3 fight win streak. So I say look to see Fluffy get it done second or third round, maybe even a decision. Because I think after that TKO loss, Barrio's going to be a little gun shy, a little timid on mixing up with him on the inside. He might not be able to avoid it. But if he's overly cautious and not willing to put himself in danger, odds are he's just going to pretty much wait out a decision and try not to get hit the whole time. Again, just an assumption. Rolling into the main card, we got kicking it off is Tanner Boser taking on Rodrigo Nascimento. Heavyweight affair. Nascimento coming off a win, turned no contest for whatever reason. I don't know what his test results were. But prior to that, he had just lost to Chris Daukaus by KO. That being Nascimento's first loss ever. Which kind of was a little bit telling. Nascimento didn't seem very comfortable with him getting bum rushed. I guess, well, he got clipped early, so tough to really make an assessment on that. Everyone's chin gets cracked, especially in the heavyweight division, but Tanner Boser, very similar style in Chris Daukaus. He's a marauder. He likes to fucking bum rush you. Great takedown defense. Basically a fucking Viking reincarnated. Both guys fairly similar in size. Boser definitely has the experience, and he's shown to be way more durable over the span of his career. Out of this is going to be his 30th fight. He's only been KO'd one time against Tim Hague, RIP. But if you look at the names he's fucking fought and he hasn't gotten finished by, it's pretty impressive. So you got... Hold on one second. So Cyril gone, unanimous decision, but lasted the whole time with him. How many guys in the top 15 haven't been able to go the full time with Cyril? Andrei Arlovsky. That one's in question too, because I recall that one being a bad judge's decision. After that, Latifi lost to him, but that was a split decision. And then just recently, he knocked out OSP. And prior to Andrei Arlovsky, he had 2 wins before that, so I don't want to make it sound like he lost 3 in a row. He did TKO in the second round, someone that's fairly similar in style to Nascimento, and that's Rafael Pessoa. Both Brazilians, both heavy, both good on the ground and striking. So I like Tanner Bozer's odds in this one. I definitely know if it goes the full time that Bozer's going to be the fresher of the two. So look to see Bozer win it by maybe a decision. If not, definitely see him getting a late second round stoppage probably. Might even be able to get a first one. So it'd be interesting to see. But I definitely think, yeah, it'd be tough because I only see Rodrigo Nascimento's only way of winning this would be by submission. And Bozer's never been submitted, so there's a first for everything, but I don't think, and they say every dog has his day, I don't think this is going to be the dog's day. I think Tanner Bozer gets it done by finish. Again, maybe a decision, but more likely a finish. Following that, you got newcomer Joseph Bodybags Piper coming off the Contender Series. Joseph, another one of those guys that has a lot of potential, and if he's going to get put against someone in his debut, this is a fairly good matchup for him. He's taking on Alen Emedovski. I believe he's from Macedonia. Emedovski is a perfect example of a guy getting blinded by the lights. So, Emedovski was undefeated coming into the UFC, 8-0. Since then, he has been 0-3 in the UFC. So, either the competition he was fighting was nowhere near the caliber that it was once he got there, so he got kind of overwhelmed. The crowd was probably bigger, so that was probably a big shell shock. Maybe he's a more introverted person. I don't really know him. But for whatever reason, ever since he's got to the UFC, he has not been able to find his foothold. Whereas Joseph Piper, if he didn't dislocate his elbow. Let me just name the entire anatomy of his arm until I get it right. But he dislocated his shoulder against Dustin Solsvis. And if he doesn't do that, there's a very good chance he knocks him out. Because Joseph Piper is the real deal. I think he does get ranked at some point. It'd be interesting to see how far he actually goes. The middleweight division's a pretty tough one to climb up in. But I think he sticks around for a long time, and I think he gets it done on this weekend. I think he gets the first round KO. Because, again, this one comes down to confidence, and the man that usually says he can and the man that usually says he can't are both normally right. And I think Joseph Piper is saying that he can, and I'm pretty sure Emedovski is questioning whether or not he can or can't. So look to see Piper get it done quick. First round knockout. And speak of the devil, next we got Chidi Njokuani taking on Gregory Rodriguez. This one's... So Njokuani had a guy fairly similar to Rodriguez in his last matchup, Dusko Todorovic. Really good grappler. It'd be really tough for me to say who has the better top pressure, Dusko Todorovic or Rodriguez. Because that's going to be the key contributor to who wins the fight. If Rodriguez can keep Njokuani on his back. Because Todorovic was able to take down Njokuani, and Rodriguez, I think, can do the same. I'm fairly certain. But it's a matter of if Njokuani can get to his feet. If Njokuani can get to his feet, then Njokuani's been assassinating people. As we just talked about, he knocked out Andre Bellia with a clean 1-2, first 2 punches of the fight. And then he gave Todorovic a elbow from fucking hell. And this again was after Todorovic had taken him down, kind of muscled him around a little bit for 2 or 3 minutes. But to my understanding, Jokwani has a black belt in jiu-jitsu. I'm not sure who under. So, like I always say, the belt system's kind of arbitrary because you could be a purple belt under Renzo Gracie, and then you could be a black belt under a student of a student of a student of his. And then those black belts tend to not carry as much weight as a Higa Machado, a Renzo Gracie, a Rickson Gracie. So it's very tough to grade how good somebody actually is based on their belt rank. Obviously, if you got a fucking coral belt, you can strangle the shit out of 80 to 90% of most of the planet, give or take, no matter who it's under, assuming it's real, obviously. But you can get white belts that have been training for 6 months that can tap a blue belt. You can get blue belts that can tap black belts. BJ Penn famously got his black belt in some ridiculous amount of time, like 3-6 years, somewhere around that span of time. So it's very tough to grade how good somebody is grappling wise based on their belt rank, especially when punches are involved. I don't care how good you are on the ground. The moment strikes get implemented, motherfuckers turn to a white belt fairly quickly. If that weren't the case, Vinny Magalhaes would be world champ. And the fact of the matter is, no matter how good Rodriguez is on the ground, every single fight that he's either fought for the UFC or for the Contender Series, he's been rocked. He's been hurt. And like I said, Jokwani has been absolutely assassinating everybody. But Rodriguez is a very heavy hitter. And Jokwani tends to keep his hands very low. Despite that little tidbit, Jokwani's been very hard to put away. I think he's only been KO'd twice, TKO'd. So a lot of factors involved with this one. This is one, honestly, if you're a bad man, I'd avoid altogether, just because it's pretty much a coin flip. But if I have to pick one just based off of Chitty's last performance against Dusko and how he was able to get off the ground after being taken down, a little bit different style of grappling. Dusko is more of a ground and pound guy, so he leaves more space to be able to get back to your feet. Rodriguez is a little more submission based. But same thing I think occurs. I think Chitty, if he is a black belt, obviously you would assume he knows escapes. And if Rodriguez does try to implement some kind of ground and pound, that'll leave the space that Chitty needs to get back to his feet. And my coach Roger Denton once told me that if you can stop somebody's game plan 3 times, they tend to abandon it. So if Chitty's able to either stuff the takedown or either get back to his feet 3 times, then one would assume Rodriguez is going to abandon that game plan, just try to stand and bang with him because he has the power to put Chitty out. Is he able to touch his chin, though? With the way things have been going, you kind of got to lean towards Chitty. So I have Chitty taking it by 2nd round TKO. Could be earlier or later, but it'll be fun either which way while it lasts. As for the co-main, you have Andre Touchy-Feely taking on Bill Algeo. This one's also an even money, at least on the books anyway. I don't think it's going to be as close as the books say it is, because Bill Algeo has been pretty much putting the work on everybody. He's shown an extremely high fight IQ. He's got a fucking chin of granite. If you hit him in the head with a bat, he'd laugh in your face. He's damn near impossible to submit. I don't think he's ever been submitted yet. Great cardio base is there the entire time in your face. I'd like to see him in a 5-round fight, to be completely honest with you. Where Andre Feely, been around a while, kind of at the tail end of his career, lost a couple in a row, kind of probably questioning where his place is in the UFC, if it's worth to keep going or not. So you got to kind of question his motivation, and you also got to consider, people say not to do MMA math, but Andre Feely, who typically never gets TKO, just got beat by Johan Janssen Britu, I want to say. And this is a guy that Bill Algeo outclassed 2 or 3 fights ago, give or take. So one has to figure if a guy that Bill Algeo outclassed the guy that he's fighting now, is the same scenario more likely to happen? I would say so. I think it'll be a competitive fight. I think Bill Algeo will probably either submit him or take him to a decision. So I would say Bill Algeo catches Feely in some sneaky shit late second or third round or squeaks out the decision. And lastly, and probably the hardest one, we got Corey Sandhagen taking on Yadong Sung. Corey Sandhagen fighting out an elevation team in Colorado. So Colorado, high elevation, so you got to figure the cardio base is there as always. He's got Gagey, Kamaru Usman, Alistair Overeem all as his sparring partners, training partners. So pretty good room of guys if you ask me. Yadong Sung, similar case. He trains out of Team Alpha Male. So coach is Uriah Faber. So both guys have a pretty solid grappling game. Corey Sandhagen's would be more wrestling based. He's very flexible. I've noticed in past fights where he's been in deep in submissions and he's been fine, almost immune to certain ones, one would say. He's managed to contort his way out of arm bars when he thought his arm was going to get snapped in half. He's been in triangles where he thought he would be unconscious, managed to get his way out of it. Darce's similar thing. So for Yadong Sung, who comes out of a predominantly grappling camp and Team Alpha Male under Uriah Faber, a lot of guillotines, a lot of chokes. And really the only choke that Corey Sandhagen's had trouble with is rear naked, and that's when Aljamain had his back, had him sprawled out, pretty much a helpless position, so he kind of had no other option in that situation. But with a virtuoso like Trevor Whitman in the corner of Corey Sandhagen, a little bit of a tongue twister there. I'm sure they've since filled that hole. I think it's been 2 years since him and Aljamain fought. And with the experience that Corey Sandhagen has in main events and in 5-round fights, you have to figure, has the advantage as the fight goes further and further into the rounds. Not to mention Yadong Sung, very explosive, very twitchy. Hasn't seen a 5-round fight to my knowledge. So if he's unable to put away Corey Sandhagen in those first 2 rounds, I'll even give him. Even the early third, rather. That'd be right around where his last ditch effort is, but anything further than that, he can't put Corey Sandhagen away, I don't think. And last time I checked, Corey Sandhagen never been knocked out. I'm assuming when you have a sparring partner like Justin Gagey, where he's a goddamn psychopath, when you're unanimously the most violent man in the sport and no one argues against it, and you spar with that motherfucker every day, chances are you're going to have the ultimate poise in the midst of chaos. So I think it's going to be competitive for the first 3 rounds. I think the audience is going to get what they paid to see. Actually, I think it's free, which is even better. But I think you're going to get a fucking war for 2 or 3 rounds. Then once exhaustion meets the relentless attack of Corey Sandhagen, I think that's going to be where Yadong Sung wilts. I see this more or less being a learning experience for Yadong Sung, because this is his first real taste of a main event and like main publicity. Again, he's never been to a 5-round fight, so a lot of firsts for Yadong Sung. And Corey Sandhagen so far has been through the ringer as far as competition wise. Yadong Sung's just now starting to fight guys like Marlon Moraes. I believe he fought Frankie Edgar. Marlon Vera, who against Marlon Vera, he arguably lost that one. I remember that one being very close, and I graded it in the direction of Marlon. So if nothing else, that kind of works as a gauge for where Yadong Sung's at. I think that was maybe about 2 years ago. So a lot can happen in that period of time as far as development, but Corey Sandhagen has been fighting elite competition for that long too as well. And he's eager to redeem himself against both guys that are fighting for the title in Aljamain Sterling and TJ Dillashaw, who he potentially beat. I'd have to rewatch that one in person myself. But like I said, with that experience in those late rounds, I think that makes all the difference in this fight. So we'll look to see Corey Sandhagen take it in probably round 4 or 5, maybe by like a knee or something. Great fucking card, though. A lot of underdogs that you could potentially cash on, parlay them together. Remember, the more underdogs you have, it don't even really matter if they're just barely above even money. That makes all the difference in your parlays. Because why bet a couple guys that are minus 350, 420? You got to string 5 of these guys together just to make a fucking buck. And this is MMA. Anything can happen. So this past week I had Jake Collier taking on Chris Barnett. It was my only miss aside from all the mix-ups and shit like that. I was pretty much 100%. Jack Collier beat the hell out of Chris Barnett, who was a 3-1 underdog. Jake fell. Chris Barnett's heavy ass was too much for Jake Collier to shake off of him. Ended up getting TKO'd. Shit happens. So why string a bunch of guys that are supposedly sure bets? Which, to me, no such thing. So why string 4, 5, 6 of these guys that are supposedly sure things when shit could happen? So bet 2 or 3 guys that are underdogs that have a pretty decent chance at a solid price. Like, even for example, I bet against Yadong Sung in this one, but he is a plus 175, and at that price, he does have a chance of winning. Do I think he does? Not particularly. But if you can get 2 or 3 guys that have that solid chance of winning, you'll make just as much as if you string 4, 5, 6 favorites in a row. So I'll even take it a step further. I'll give a potentially perfect parlay of the day where I do 3 or 4 particular underdogs that I think are going to cash more likely than not. So, as far as what we got for the stand-ins, I would say, since I expressed a strong belief in Cameron Van Camp, he's at a plus 160. Like I said, I think Mota likes to play the bully, and if he can't play the bully, especially to a bigger guy, I don't think it's going to pan out for him. Louis Cozy, if he can work on that cardio base and make it out of the first round, I think he'll be a very, very dangerous opposition for Trevin Giles, especially with that chin. He's at a plus 180. And like I said, you got Bill Algeo at even money, exactly, plus 100. So you got $100 for $100. And if you happen to add all these bitches together, it comes out to a plus 13.5, give or take. So if you put down 100, you'll get 1356 back. 1456 back plus your 100. My apologies. And say you want to maybe sprinkle Corey Sandhagen or Fluffy Hernandez in there at maybe minus 195, give or take, between both guys. You can make it pretty much $2,200, $2,202.67, yada, yada, yada. So if you got a little side cash, you want to sprinkle $20-$50, you'll give or take maybe get $600 back, $1,100. That's only if you got the spare money, you know what I'm saying? So if you guys do take me up on my insights and my suggestions, then may they bring wealth and prosperity to all y'all. And for those that have made it this far in the podcast, thank you all very much for listening. I would like to memorialize these potentially perfect picks of the week to Elias Theodorou, UFC vet, who's also essentially the Colin Kaepernick of cannabis for the UFC. Was pretty much on he was on like a 4-5 fight win streak with the UFC, lost one. Made a big stink on how the UFC doesn't allow cannabis use and it was a banned substance, even though it's not a performance enhancer. It has since been removed off of a bunch of commissions, primarily due to him voicing his outrage about the situation, and rightfully so. Apparently he was, and I don't know his medical records, I don't know how long he's had it for, but he unfortunately at the age of 34 died of liver cancer, which is a shame, very young. Aside from that, you would assume he was a clean fucking bill of health. Was an absolute Adonis, probably banged more women in his short lifetime than I will in my entire. So it really is a shame. Guy's career, life got cut short. Had probably one of the biggest ceilings that anybody could have went any route. And probably would have been successful in a lot of different ways. But unfortunately, the good die young, which shit. Strange it happens that way, isn't it? But unfortunately, it's the reality that we live in right now. May all my blessings and all yours go out to the Theodorou family. And may all my blessings go out to the rest of you as well. If y'all made it this far in the episode, thank y'all very much for listening. A lot of fun. Glad I